My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic multiverse. It's mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
No matter what our family's expectations are, we will keep putting it under the microscope because that is who we are. No, really, we don't care about what our family thinks, really.
I mean, it'd be nice if my family listened to this more often. I keep telling them to, and then they say they're going to, or they, I get the response, "Oh, I don't listen to podcasts a lot when I'm trying to promote the show." I don't know if you get that kind of response from people.
About podcasting specifically, or?
Well, I'd like to think you're doing as much guerrilla
geeky
promotion of the show as I am when you're just talking to people.
Oh, I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I'm a terrible co-host. I don't promote the show all that often. I mentioned it in passing once in one of my classes, and then one of my students immediately went online to find the latest episode and started listening to it. But that's like about the level of promotion I've done with the show recently.
All right, so this episode is meant to be talking about the Pixar movie Turning Red. My new internet and my new home has not been very agreeable to me, so our episode might feel a little jumpy because we might literally be starting and stopping, and that is all right. Hopefully our underpaid editor can make it sound perfect.
Or at least make it sound like a cohesive conversation.
Now, I want to start by talking about the relationship that Disney seems to have with Pixar these days. Because I have not seen a Pixar movie since Onward came out just about 2 years ago, like right before the pandemic started.
Did you not watch Luca then?
I haven't watched Luca or Soul.
Oh, wow. I mean, interesting, because both of those were pretty decent. I mean, and both of those also got the same treatment as apparently, I guess, Pixar movies are just getting now of being released directly onto Disney Plus.
Yeah, and this is the part I don't understand. I get it why it happened with Onward. Onward came out like a month before, or maybe it was even like 2 weeks before movie theaters started closing. So it made sense that they would drop that on Disney Plus and make it free for people to watch. Because at that point, the pandemic seemed, it was like, oh, this will only be for a little while. So here's a little movie that you can just watch on Disney Plus.
Yeah, I don't know. It does seem like almost like Disney is mad at Pixar for something. Or, I don't know, is Pixar's contract up and they're trying to like renegotiate, and Disney's like, oh, well, you're not making as much money. That'd be kind of a,
Well, Disney owns Pixar now, so that can't be the case.
Oh, yeah. They just, they fully own them, right? Yeah. I don't know. Perhaps it's some other inner workings of the Disney company that we are not privy to.
Well, it's head scratching because they did in 2021. They did all these premiere access releases, right? Like they did it for Raya, they did it for Cruella, they did it for Black Widow, they did it for Jungle Cruise, they did it for live action Mulan.
Yeah, and all of those movies were not great. Maybe that's why they did. Maybe we're looking at this from the wrong angle. Maybe it's actually that they trust that Pixar movies will bring more people to their streaming service without having to charge money. And they looked at the movies they were releasing, like, these are kind of hit and miss, so we'll put a premium access, and people will think they're better and have to pay for them.
That's an interesting take. I mean, you could also look at it as saying they're not confident that Pixar movies can make as much money.
I honestly think that it's more to like I think it's more of a Disney needs to know where their profit is for like Disney movies and less so for Pixar kind of. But I mean, I was gonna say Encanto got released, but Encanto got released in theaters first, so I don't know.
And the week before Turning Red was supposed to be in theaters, The Batman made $134 million.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, that one is baffling, but also Turning Red was supposed to have a theater release, wasn't it?
That's what I'm saying. It was supposed to
Yeah.
be released in theaters March 11th, and then in like late January 2022, they decided it was going to go straight to Disney Plus, no premiere access.
Yeah, it is a head scratcher for sure. Although I don't know, I feel like I'm also confused as to why you haven't seen the last two. I mean, no, actually, I can see that. Soul and Luca's definitely. I think I watched Luca mostly because my wife Mjolnir was very pregnant when it released, and now we have a kid, so it is definitely more of a watch with your kids Pixar movie. Whereas Soul was more aimed at adults, but there were things about Soul that were just weird.
Honestly, I think in my head, how I view those movies is like, well, Disney didn't think they were worth putting in theaters, and they didn't think they were worth me spending extra money on them. So in a weird way, it's like, well, they're not worth my time, which does not make any sense.
Yeah, and Disney is definitely wrong in thinking it wasn't worth putting in theaters, or like again, Soul kind of understand why they didn't, because again, the timing was really bad. Luca, they probably could have just pushed back to the release date and gotten like at least a limited release on DVD. Sorry, on in theaters. But I definitely think that Soul should have been a premium access. Luca, the thing is, here's the thing. Like, I feel like that almost might have been one of the reasons why Turning Red didn't, because Luca and Soul didn't. Because I feel like of the three of those movies, I think Turning Red is the weaker one. I liked it better than Soul personally, but like from an objective standpoint, I see why it wouldn't be as interesting or as marketable as Soul was. And I think Luca was just slightly better quality than both. But so I guess maybe that's what it is. They're like, well, can we really do this if we've got set up this precedent already?
I do know from watching box office reports that Luca for a long time was like the most streamed movie. So having it just a movie that went on Disney Plus for free definitely helped it gain a larger audience, I suppose, because there was no paywall beyond just the actual Disney Plus membership.
Yeah, but then it's weird that they would see that and not think, oh, maybe the next Pixar movie will put premium access, because like if you are the most streamed movie, it's not just because you were free. Like because Netflix released a bunch of movies, since the pandemic started that were also free with their service, right? And like Amazon has a few too. Admittingly, that most of them I don't think were great at all, but like it seems weird that you wouldn't start putting trust in that again, seeing those results.
And then even more baffling, recently it was announced that Encanto is going to go back to movie theaters with like its sing-along version after the movie. It has done really well on streaming on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
So why does Encanto get to go to theaters for a second time and Turning Red doesn't get to go at all?
I mean, Encanto is objectively a better movie than Turning Red, and also I think the bigger thing is that Encanto is a revival for Disney's musical. So having this sing along release, like, I don't necessarily agree with it. I don't think it, like, you're right. I do think that Turning Red deserves it more than Encanto necessarily deserves a second round, but I do understand why they're pushing Encanto more.
All right. Well, that's enough about Disney and Pixar. Their parent-child relationship can figure itself out. But we're here to talk about a different parent-child relationship. So, Beeper, give us a Blu-ray case description. I don't even know if they release these movies on Blu-ray. Like, is there a sole Blu-ray DVD out there?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, let's pretend there's a Blu-ray for Turning.
A Disney Plus description.
Yeah. Yes. Give us the Disney Plus description of Turning Red.
I'm Maylin Lee. I wear what I want, say what I want. I'm all about that hustle.
Streaming March 11th on Disney Plus.
It's a lot. And any strong emotion.
May? Why are you staring at Carter Murphy Mayhew?
We'll release the panda. OMG!
Disney and Pixar's Turning Red. Rated PG. Original movie streaming March 11th. Only on Disney Plus.
In the distant land of Toronto, Canada. Other movie that happens in Toronto. In Toronto, there is a temple, the oldest temple, Chinese temple in Toronto, and its family is perfect on the surface, but pressure to conform to family norms and to keep her parents satisfied are weighing on Mei.
May, yeah, she's like nicknamed May.
Yeah, okay, on Mei, and as she hits a allegorical puberty, she transforms into a red panda monster type thing, and now she must calm her emotions or give in to her inner animal. Which one shall it be? And which one will help her go to four kids? No, for you? Four direction? Four Street Boys.
Four Town.
410?
Four Town.
Four Town concert, which is in no way a merge of One Direction and the Backstreet Boys.
Have you seen the movie Roma?
The one that won or did very well at the Oscars?
Yes.
No.
Okay. To me, this reminded me a bit of Roma, because that is a movie that is essentially it's semi-autobiographical for its director, Alfonso Cuarón.
Right.
It's a story set in like 1970s Mexico, and it kind of tells the story of like basically someone that he knew growing up. And it feels like there's so much environment, and you feel like you're like, it just felt very personal. And this movie, Turning Red, is kind of like that, because the director of this movie, Domi Shi, she is from Toronto. She is a Chinese immigrant, Chinese Canadian. She's 34 years old now. So this movie is set in 2002, which basically means that she was basically, our main character here is like 13 years old. So she would have been around the same age as this main character growing up in Toronto. So it's kind of like, I don't think she transformed into a panda. I don't think that part's autobiographical, but in terms of the atmosphere and a lot of what you see on the movie, it is very much meant to, I guess, be her own story. And there was one review that was put up on the website Cinema Blend that actually it caused some controversy, and it was eventually taken down. But Beeper, would you mind just reading what that review had to say about the movie?
By rooting Turning Red very specifically in the Asian community of Toronto, the film legitimately feels like it was made for Domishi's friends and immediate family members, which is fine, but also a tad limiting in its scope.
Now, like I said, this review was taken down
Yeah.
very quickly.
I mean, well, okay, and so we were talking, Milner and I were talking about Canadian representation in movies, because that was something, and I think you and I talked about it a little bit before doing this, was like, or no, we didn't talk about it before doing this episode, but we talked about it last episode. It's like, hey, this is cool to see something, that is actually set in Canada, and I think there were a lot of cool things to it, but like, to think you'd have to be a Chinese immigrant, first off, you wouldn't have to be a Chinese immigrant in Toronto. I think anybody who has lived or been to Toronto, and even I think anybody who lives in a major Canadian city, immigrant or not, already gets more out of this than most people would. And so I think like already the scope is beyond obviously beyond what this review said, but even just, is capable of reaching out more people. And, and again, the story is, a tad generic, but having a generic story actually makes it so that you can appeal to more people. And, about it being autobiographical, I mean, so was Scott Pilgrim to a certain degree and set in Toronto, like literally set in places that, the graphic novel had been set in because they were real places. Like they shot the house where Tommy Lee O'Malley grew up because that's what he drew in the graphic novel and they knew where to find it in Toronto. Like, to be fair, Scott Pilgrim did not do very well at the box office, but I think it's still a good movie and it still has a wider appeal than just, kids who grew up in Toronto listening to indie music.
Yeah, and so when I saw Roma, I'm like, this is interesting, but I there's a disconnect here. Like I can't relate to this person's story because I've never lived in Mexico. I didn't live in the 1970s. And you could feel like there was a certain amount of passion injected into the project that I'm sure meant a lot to him and perhaps other people who could relate to that. Watching this movie with Tater Tot, who did not grow up in Ontario, I do wonder if there's a certain amount of enjoyment that I got out of the movie because I recognized Daisy Mart and the CN Tower, and like there were all kinds of little Easter eggs.
Well, you specifically grew up near Toronto, like much closer to Toronto than I did, even, right?
Yeah, like the same year that this movie is set, I went to an NSYNC concert at the Sky Dome. And that's like something that happens in this movie. They go see a boy band concert at the Sky Dome. So I definitely have a personal bias, like connecting me to this story.
Yeah, we'll talk about you going to an NSYNC concert later, but yeah, and I think like I do think that this was definitely a movie made for Canadians. Like that I can accept. And I can say that it might limit it a little bit to a broader audience to some degree. But at the same time, like Scott Pilgrim, just because it's set in Canada doesn't and has a few more Canadian jokes, it doesn't automatically make it unattainable for other people. I mean, people watch the original Mad Max. That was as Australian, well, not as Australian, but, pretty close to as Australian as a movie can be. It was a bunch of guys driving around on highways during the oil crisis. Like, it's very niche to Australia, but it was still, people still liked it and liked it enough to, get an entire massively successful franchise attached to it and, propel Mel Gibson, yep, to superstardom. Like, something doesn't, just because something is set somewhere doesn't mean only people from that place can enjoy it. And yes, it was a little more autobiographical, but like, I don't know, I can think of a lot of other movies that have that kind of feel to them, but aren't alienating.
Now, I became aware of Domi Shi because she directed the animated short film Bao, which played in front of Incredibles 2 back in 2018. And that she also set that in Toronto. So you get to see like the CN Tower and but that short film, even though again I'm not Asian, I'm yeah I the even though it was a short film that portrayed a story that I don't have direct experience with, I was able to emotionally connect to it, and I'm happy it won the Oscar for best animated short film.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, injecting part of your culture and heritage into your art doesn't necessarily mean only people from that cultural heritage can appreciate it, right? And I think that, I I think there was I remember somebody making a review of Turning Red that was like, people were already so ready to dislike it because it was about, a Chinese Canadian, teenage girl living in Toronto, and everybody was already dismissing it before it was even released, and I really wanted it to be really good. Which I think it's definitely a lot better than critics were giving it credit for before it was released, obviously. Um, it's not the best movie ever, but I did personally really appreciate some of the more Canadian touches to it, like, just having a box of Tim Horton donuts on the table, or like, yeah, you were talking about the Marts, and just seeing the Greater Toronto area and the transit system, just
Toonies.
the fact that Skydome was in it.
It's also interesting. They released a documentary on Disney Plus. It was like called "Embrace the Panda," and it was like about the making of Turning Red. So of course I watched it to prepare for this episode. They make a point of saying in this documentary that Turning Red was the first Pixar film with an all-female leadership team. So the main producer, special effects person, director of photography, and director were all women. And apparently this is the first Pixar movie where a woman is the main, like the only director. There's been some Pixar movies co-directed by women, but this is the first one where a woman's the main director. So I think that makes a lot of sense that the main characters are all female and that the central relationships in the movie are female relationships.
But
As a male viewer, I was still able to enjoy this. Like I didn't feel alienated.
yeah, and at the same time, like, even though he was a more backseat minor character, the dad still had important scenes, and he was still a character, right? Like, the few male characters that were in it weren't just placed as like token male characters. They still had a like pretty important place in the story, and were of consequence. And like, and even the fact that the dad wasn't of much consequence was part of the story, right? It wasn't just a result of having a woman in charge.
Yeah, so the big part of this movie is relationships between children and parents, and we'll touch on that in a moment. But just a couple of things I found interesting watching the documentary. One, they highlight how they did indeed use Zoom when the production had to move to working from home with the pandemic. They must have been thinking ahead because they literally sent camera crews like people's houses, and they were kind of showing their work from home setups. And I always enjoy those kind of things. Just it helps me realize, like, oh yeah, this COVID pandemic thing that I've been living has been actually experienced by everybody. And then they also talked about how they want to kind of give their characters like realistic features. So like they talked about how some of the people working on the movie have like eyebrows that are kind of like missing hairs and spots, or that they have moles on their faces. So they gave their characters kind of features as a way of like kind of owning their I'm gonna call them air quotes imperfections, but that's kind of like how they talked about it. So they're, again, it's a documentary. They're trying to tell me something, but I certainly got the message that they were trying to be very personal and intentional with the movie.
Yeah, and I think like it does, because I watched it with my mother and my daughter. And one of the things that she did point out was the level of detail in the character design, and I think that was something that was really good. And like, and I think, and beyond just the personal design, there was obviously a big emphasis put on, like, I don't want to say representation because it wasn't. It was really giving the impression or giving the feeling that it is to live in a multicultural city like Toronto, because a lot of movies, and I don't know if this is because that is how it is in the States or how it is in certain parts of the world, but I feel like a lot of movies that focus on immigrant families will have like everybody is white except for the people from the same culture as that family, right? Like if it's about, a Chinese immigrant family, then everybody's going to be white except the people who are Chinese. And this movie actually had a much more, to me, realistic kind of showing of different people and the diversity of people who would be working or living in a city like Toronto. There are a few details also that I want to talk about, but those are kind of nitpicks. So while we're still on broad strokes, I thought that was cool.
It was also learning, it was cool to learn about Domishi in this documentary. They talk about how when she was in high school, she was the vice president of her anime club. She was a very big anime fan. You see, like, you get a studio tour of her house and you see that she has like anime artwork. Like she has a portrait of Rumiko Takahashi on her wall. She has copies of Fruits Baskets manga lying around. They had old pictures that she drew of Sailor Moon. And you just see, her influences and she is a true blue anime fan. I guess she entered like a fan art contest to like draw like what Draco Malfoy's kids would look like. This is sort of, I mean, I even though I don't know her, I'm like, okay, we are of the same ilk. And when you look at the main character again, assuming that she's meant to be like some kind of insert for Domishi, it's like, yeah, you're a dork, but you're endearing and you got the confidence.
And I think it was also, I think we're going to talk about this a little bit more, I think, when we talk about like parent relationship, but it was a good portrayal of like what it is for people who who still respect their parents even though they think they're a bit much. Like there's only one instance in the movie where it kind of goes overboard, and it was it felt almost a little contrived, but at the same time not really, because it was the first time that her mom was directly confronting her about something. But beyond the direct confrontation, she was still very much not like, she wasn't forced to do the things that she did. Mostly she wanted to do them. She just like was still bummed out that she was missing out on certain things, but wasn't resentful of it.
Yeah, so like I said, this movie's been fairly controversial in its short time of existence. I mentioned the first controversy of like the perception that it's too niche to appeal to a large audience. The second controversy is the way in which the movie represents and talks about puberty. And then the third controversy is the parent-child relationships portrayed in the movie. I've even like had some people say it should have been rated PG-13 because the degree to which they talk about certain elements of puberty in this film are arguably conversations that parents should decide when to have with their kids and not have it just be kind of displayed for them in a movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's sorry. The thing about the puberty one is that like I do understand it to some degree, but it's not like it's explicitly put either. Like it is explicitly in the movie, but it's not like, first off, it's played for a laugh because they think it, you're not sure. You think it might be the panda, the fact that she transformed into a panda, but no, her mom is talking about her having her first period, but like it's not like it's addressing it in a way that is aggressively talking about what your period is. It doesn't say, I don't think it says it's her period. I think the only actual technical term that's used is pad, and like that's not a crazy thing to put in. And yeah, I do understand the idea that some people might want to control when they talk about puberty to their children, but also on some level, I don't know. Like, obviously, this is an international movie release, but like in Canada, that's just gonna happen in the school system anyways, and before they are 13. So like, to me, it doesn't seem like that much of a stretch or that big a deal at all. And honestly, if it's the start for like having a healthy conversation or like even a conversation about puberty, like, again, it's enough to trigger a conversation, but it's definitely not enough to force a conversation, right? And I think people are saying that it's forcing a conversation, it's forcing that, but like, I'm sorry, it happens once. There's one scene.
Well,
but like,
there's
tons
more
of
anyway.
Scenes in movies like just go over kids' heads, right?
Yeah, I think I heard someone put it. It's like this is not a movie you can just put on for your kids, because there's the puberty piece, but then there's also the parent-child relationship piece. Like I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable having a child under the age of 12 or 13 just sit down and watch this on their own, because there are things related to both just the experience of puberty, but also how the parent-child relationships are portrayed here, that I would want to be able to kind of accompany my kids through this experience. I wouldn't want them to just sit down and watch this and then, not have anyone to kind of process it with. And we're gonna have to just go into spoilers here, because we really can't talk too much about these elements of the story without spoiling things that happen. Yeah, I think let's just go there. Let's go inside the spoiler verse. My spoiler-free comment is, yeah, like this is definitely a movie you can watch with your kids, but you need to be prepared to have a conversation with them. Don't just put this on for them. Like this isn't one of those movies that you can just put on to entertain your kids.
I don't know. I would honestly argue that you could, and things will either go over their head or you talk to them afterwards. But because I understand that this is a movie that explicitly explores like parent-kid relationship, but then again, so is Finding Nemo, like in a different way, obviously, and one that isn't directly linked to puberty, but that very much does have to do with, child independence, which is something that does happen during puberty. Like, it doesn't necessarily, like, I don't think just because it's one scene explicitly talks about something, it means that you can't let your kids enjoy the movie. Like, and I think, generally speaking, you should be aware of any movie that you're going to show your children. So if you think you're going to need to sit down and have a conversation with your kids, then yeah, watch it with them. If not, yeah, just play it for them.
Right. But before we go into spoilers, I'll just say that element is nowhere in the marketing. Like, it's not clear that they're talking about that. So there's no way you'd have to really do your research to know that is in the movie before you just let your kids watch it.
Yeah, that's
anyway.
Fair.
There will be a time code in the description to jump around spoilers. We're inside the spoiler verse now, talking about the spoilers for Turning Red.
Okay. This isn't a spoiler, but can I just talk about like the one small detail that I don't know why I really appreciated, but I did?
Go for it.
I just thought it was so spot on that the security guard at her school was Sikh, and I don't know if that's like a common thing just in Ontario, or if it's like a thing in Canada, or if it's specific to like that area, but it just felt like so real.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. That would make sense. All right, so let's talk about the puberty stuff first, because yes, there's the one scene that is making a parallel to a girl's first period and whatnot, but the talk about puberty goes beyond just that. Like, there's this whole, I guess you could say, sexual awakening where she's like all of a sudden like very much interested in boys, and there's a lot of time dedicated to like fawning over boys, fantasizing over boys.
Yeah, but I mean, wait, is that where your link to the Goofy movie is?
I could be, but no.
No, but because her involvement with boys is about on the level of Max's involvement with girls in a Goofy movie.
No, yeah, you're right. No, but the inspiration,
no, like,
The inspiration connection to a
I
Goofy
hate to
movie
say
is the parent-child relationship ending up with a concert. That's where she drew inspiration from a Goofy movie.
it. Okay. But and I look, I think I think that there is definitely more controversy around it because it's preteen girls. Like, I don't know if you heard what Mjolnir said, but like, yeah, there are a lot of movies about guys going through puberty that like don't have that kind of stigma, like Teen Wolf. You know, that's what it was about, and I don't remember people making a big fuss about it. Like, a Goofy movie does hit on some of those things, and I don't think it was, that crazy and that ridiculous either. And even if you push it as like the panda is puberty and it's taking her over and giving her different interests and pulling her away from her mother, which, the analogy is obviously there, but like it's also not a terrible thing to talk about. And like they're in grade 8. Like
Yeah, and I'm not.
I teach
Oh, by
grade
the way,
8s. They are
they
beyond that level of discussion. Like maybe no, maybe yes, if you're showing it to a 5-year-old. But I feel like this movie is either going to go over their heads or it's going to be they're watching it at a good time where you should have this discussion with your kids anyway. And maybe you're right that there should be a warning or you should do your research. But again, I think parents should do that either way. And yes, at some point, it's something that begs a conversation. But again, I think any movie that has like teenagers who rebel begs the same level of conversation.
Yeah, and let me be clear. This isn't my opinion. I'm highlighting
Yeah, that's
things
true.
that people have taken issue with or have kind of spoken about in regards to the movie. Because the puberty thing is one thing, but then there's the whole parent-child relationship thing. And to me, it's like it's very realistic. I know a lot of people who are of Asian descent, and they have, I would say, very like challenging dynamics in terms of their relationship with their parents and the expectations that are put upon them and whatnot. And
Yeah,
but the movie
the
is
thing
told
is,
mostly
and
from
also,
the.
I think that's it's one of those things where it's like, yes, this movie was a little autobiographical and does somewhat rely on certain stereotypes, but I mean, I grew up in a, relatively conservative Catholic family, and I definitely was way less rebellious than a lot of my friends and most of my siblings, right? So I still find ways to identify with that idea of, a teenager who is becoming their own person, but is still able to or trying to maintain a good relationship with their parents, right? And I feel like had my parents been a little stricter, not, and again, not, I'll put this in air quotes, Asian levels, but at the same, but I also have quite a few friends who have Asian parents, and there are varying degrees of truth to the stereotype, but I think it's still just generally doesn't just apply to the Asian experience. It's a parenting style that exists and that is just more prevalent perhaps in this community. And maybe it's just because that was a style that her parents had, and this is partially autobiographical.
Yeah, and to be clear, the controversy is not that they're portraying Asian families this way. The controversy is that it's just any parent-child relationship this way. That's where the child is like lying to their parents and sneaking out, and it's it's again, this is not the only movie that does this, right? Where like a young
Not even close.
No, but it's just another example of here's a preteen who thinks they know better than their parents, and they're going to go against their parents' wishes. So naturally, you can expect there's a crowd of parents who like, I don't want my kids watch this movie because it's going to give them the message that, oh, like kids know better than their parents.
Yeah, but I mean, it backfires a lot more than other movies who do this. Like, Tangled has more or less the same thing. And she is technically a teenager, maybe not a preteen, but, Rapunzel is a teenager and she does think she knows better. And the movie does reinforce, oh no, she did know better than her mom. Her mom was fully being abusive. At least in this movie, it was like, yeah, you didn't really know better than your mom because she, we're in the spoilerverse. She does lose control of the panda and ends up hurting somebody. She does trigger her entire family and cause like all of her aunties and grandmother to have to revert to panda style in order to save her mom. Like there are negative consequences, very direct negative consequences of her rebellious action. And those stay even though there's a reconciliation, and eventually like she doesn't live the life she exactly wanted to do despite her parents. There is a compromise. Like, at the end of the movie, she's still working in the temple. She is still hanging out with her family. She still has maintained that link to her family and her background. It just is moderated. It's changed.
Yeah, and in the documentary, you hear Domishi kind of say, "I really don't know what we're trying to say with this movie," because she says even as a 34-year-old, she still struggles with that tension of, wanting to, maintain a healthy relationship with her parents while also being her own person. And interestingly, I was talking to someone this morning after church, and they were like, "Yeah, with a Pixar movie, usually there's like a clear message that they're walking away from, like a message for kids. But with Turning Red, it wasn't clear what they were trying to say." And, it's like, well, having heard the director say, like, they don't know what they're trying to say. They're just sort of portraying life without any clear theme or messaging, which is very much a thing in cinema and independent film and even like some bigger movies. But certainly, if your target audience is children, usually, and I would argue you probably should have some kind of, even if it's less realistic, you should probably still have some kind of
I think,
message that you're
like,
walking away from.
one of the nice, like, I think it was nice for it to kind of not be like that. And I, like, honestly, there were just, I think it does make it better that there isn't a direct message, because relationship with your parents is something that always evolves. Like I remember, while watching it, my mother making comments about her relationship with her parents and my dad's relationship with his parents, and they're 60, and how it's still some aspects of this movie about a preteen still were relevant to those relationships, right? Um, and I definitely felt like some of them, you know, just the idea of how, balancing a degree of respect for your parents and being your own person, that doesn't, sorry there, that doesn't go away after puberty. That doesn't go away after young adulthood. That just changes and evolves. And I think this movie portrays that, an evolution in it. And, you know, to me, that beats a bad message. Like, no message, but a good portrayal of life is better than having a message that is kind of warped. Like, you should trust everybody no matter what they do.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. I liked the fact that the movie just sort of portrayed her life. Obviously, again, she didn't turn into a panda when she was younger. But I also see the argument that if the target audience of this movie is children, that is like, there's a lot of like heavy things you're kind of throwing at them in this movie that you leave unresolved by the end. And then you're kind of like, again, if they don't have their parents to accompany them through the aftermath, it's like, what is this movie trying to tell me? And like, am I not supposed to like my parents, or am I supposed to like become totally independent? Am I supposed to?
I see the argument, but I'm gonna be honest, and I'm saying this, I'm a new parent, so I can't say it from the parent point of view, but I'm a teacher, and I've been working with children and youth for almost all of my life, and like, that argument is insulting to the intelligence of children. Not just their intellectual intelligence, but their emotional intelligence. Kids pick up on things that we never do. Kids are not, don't always need an explicit talking to. I think, like, it comes back to what we said earlier. These are good things to know going into the movie, so that if you need to have a discussion with your children because of it, you should know. But I don't think any of that is like beyond what a child can understand. Like, telling your kids that, you won't always have the same relationship with them. they know that because they know that when they were toddlers or babies, they didn't have the same relationship. Or like especially if you're not an only child, if you have siblings, like I'm sure your older brother is looking at the way your parents treated you. Were like, oh yeah, we used to get treated like that, and now we don't anymore. Our relationship with our parents has evolved, and that's all you really need to get across.
It's very fitting that you're talking about that while you're holding Jam Jam.
Yeah, and while she's being slightly more problematic.
Well, I was surprised that when it comes up in the movie that everyone just sort of accepts her turning into this panda. You'd assume people would be more freaked out, but like everyone at her school just wants to see this panda. And I mean, I thought it was fun, but it was also like, oh, really? Like no one is like freaked out that she's turned into a giant animal.
Like we're I think we're running out of time in the episode to kind of do everything. So maybe we should, I don't know, like I think we talked a lot about the controversies, and yeah, you should be informed about this movie, but I feel like there's a bit more maybe to talk about the actual movie.
Yeah, so I mean, all the controversies aside, I did enjoy the film, and the transforming into a giant animal thing, made me think of Monster by Mistake, and of course made me think of Ranma 1/2 and
Oh,
Fruits
wow.
Basket.
Had not thought about the Ranma one.
Yeah, because her dad literally turned, or her dad, Ranma's confusing.
No,
But he turns
I
into an actual panda.
Yeah. But that wasn't to do with emotion. That was getting hot or cold water spilled on you.
Yes, of course. And I do think like Smallville was pitched as puberty with superpowers. So I think, yes, it totally makes sense to have this kind of magical transformation be an allegory for puberty. And with a title like Turning Red, it certainly is on the nose if you know what you're looking for in terms of yeah.
But also, even just the fact that the transformation is triggered by stronger emotions, and who has very strong emotions? Preteens and teenagers.
Yeah, what did you think of May's mother?
I thought she was a very well developed character. Like I feel like the fact that her panda persona was massive and extremely almost Godzilla size and dangerous did make up kind of explain why she was so crazy about that. And I don't know, she definitely had the helicopter mom of an only child feel to her, breaking into the school grounds just to spy on her daughter may have been a bit much, but I think the movie actually did a very good job of portraying a parent who is out of their depth and definitely taking things too far, but still always doing it for the right reasons. And then also just showing the relationship with her mother was like, oh yeah, now that this informs some of her decisions.
Because I found most of what Ming does in the first half of the movie incredibly frustrating. Like when she goes to the Daisy Mart and shows those drawings to that Devin guy, I'm like, what are you thinking? Like, what possible? How do you think this is actually going to lead to any sort of resolution? And then it just gets kind of tragic towards the end when you realize that, she had a very difficult relationship with her own mother. And you would hope that having gone through such a difficult thing with your own mother would lead to you doing things differently when it comes to your relationship with your own daughter. And again, this is a way in which the movie is realistic, is that it shows how tragic that unfortunately these kind of wounds become cyclical. They become generational.
If I can make a link to another Chinese culture inspired movie, one often meets one's destiny on the road to avoid it.
Was that Kung Fu Panda?
Master Oogway says to Shifu when he sends the duck to go to the prison, and then that makes Tai Long escape. Good foreshadowing.
But doesn't just break your heart to think like you do all these super embarrassing, overbearing things to your daughter, even though you lived through the experience of having these same things happen to you. Doesn't it just break your heart that she, despite having experienced like the trauma of having a horrible relationship with her mother, ends up doing a lot of the same things to her own daughter?
It does, but at the same time, I think they did a good job of like when they're in the spirit world and uh May goes to see her and is like and sees her as a preteen just so upset because she hurt her mother. It it shows you that there was more to it than just, you know, the bad things that happened between them, and that eventually what was driving her to do those things was the guilt that she felt about having hurt her mother. And you know, the obviously the corresponding realization that it is very dangerous to have the panda. And if you look at a lot of the overbearing things she does, a lot of them have to do with emotional control, or you know, having her not be riled up. Like you could argue that even like the fact that she hates the music she listened to is because it's a little bit more emotionally charged than the music she might want her to listen to.
One source of potential conflict that never gets really addressed in the movie is that you discover that May's way of kind of maintaining her peace is by thinking about her friends. And she lies to her parents and says, "Oh, I'm thinking of you guys, and that's how I'm so peaceful." And then this potential conflict is set up after the party at that guy's house because her mom kind of chews her friends out. And I guess I would have liked to see some resolution on that towards the end because it's sort of just forgotten about.
Yeah, it's I but I think it again, it's one of those things that falls under bad movie, good representation of life. Like, you know, which kid in 8th grade cares more about his parents than his friends? Almost none, right? So it does still kind of make sense. But you're right. It would have been nice to have like some kind of reconciliation beyond the fact that her mom is just now more accepting of her friends, which, you know, is a semi resolution.
Yeah. You mentioned her dad earlier, and I've heard several different opinions about the father character in this movie. I heard a female YouTuber talk about how there seems to be this idea that you can't have strong women and strong men together. So it's either portrayed one way or the other. Either the female is very like A-type dominant and the male is very submissive, or vice versa. And for most of this movie, he has his moments where he speaks up and like is more like he's a strong man. But most of the time he's kind of played as like the you know, almost like the submissive kind of silent type.
Yeah. Whoops. Thing is, like, again, I think that the scene they give him at the end where he's talking to May, as well as his involvement in what happens at the Sky Dome, kind of prove that he's not just submissive. He is like he's more passive than submissive. Like he doesn't, and like there's, you know, pretty good hints that he has an inferiority complex towards his wife and her family, because like when he talks about how he wasn't good enough for his mother-in-law, and she's still like she's really more the one to boss him around than his wife. Like his wife makes him do things, but it seems like he still wants to, whereas his mother-in-law, she kind of really just orders him around, right? And I think that was kind of nice to have a bit more nuance to him.
Yeah, he I'm glad if it weren't for the scene with the video camera where he like talks to May, I would have had a very different impression of this man, you know.
For
But
sure.
luckily they put that one in there.
But even how well and how quickly he takes up action in the final scene in the Sky Dome, and how dedicated he is to help, I think that also, like, I think you do need the scene with the camera in order to have that fit into his character, but there's also good character growth. And, you know, the fact that, like, he does things that are more traditionally held to be passive or feminine traits, but like they pay homage to it at the end, where all the girls are super excited to come over to eat because he turns out he's a great cook. So makes sense that he'd be the one doing all the cooking.
What did you think of her squad, her like group of friends?
I thought the squad was good. It was realistic. It was different. But like they all had, it showed that despite the fact that they were different, they all had a few things that were in common enough to make it so that they would still hang out as friends, and they were fun characters. They reminded me a lot of Mabel's group of friend in Gravity Falls.
I personally found the girl in the purple overalls very annoying. She just seemed like she was just yelling everything she was saying. But
I mean,
aside from
the main reason I thought about that group of friends in Gravity Falls was because of the girl who kind of just screams everything.
So this movie ends with this big battle at the Sky Dome, and the messaging, if there is any, sort of suggests that, because her family has always said, oh, like the panda's bad, it's gonna like it'll take over your life or whatever, and that's why they've always chosen to steal it away. But then May is the first one to choose to keep the panda. Is that meant to be like an allegory for like her embracing?
I don't know. Here's the thing that I felt that like it was, because the panda isn't a one-to-one allegory, right? I feel like it was a lot more about the fact that the panda was meant to be a fighter, and they didn't have a role where they were fighting. And that's where May kind of is different. She wants to fight for the things that she loves, and to protect the things that she cares about, and that's why she accepted, because that's how she looked at the panda. And it wasn't that it wasn't that like her grandmother, her mother, and her aunts were wrong. The panda can be dangerous, but it doesn't have to be.
Right. Yeah, because if you think the panda is supposed to be an allegory for puberty, then to say that, oh, like her family just sort of repressed all of their feelings or their puberty whatevers, that seems like a very unhealthy approach to things. And to say that she's the first one in her entire family line to really embrace all the awkwardness of puberty, again presents that I know better than my family, I'm smarter than my parents message, which some people would have an issue with. If it's meant to be try and play into more of the finding yourself in the midst of external influences of friends, external influences of family, I guess it makes more sense, because again, like she's kind of making a choice for herself, and kind of like as you said, she's found a way to kind of work at the temple but also have her friends but also keep the panda, so she's finding some sort of compromise in that.
I found there was enough in like the sequences in the spirit world and in the lore that you can put a lot of interpretations to it. Like, because I felt like it was a lot more about embracing what her heritage was and what the panda originally was supposed to represent. And when her mother tells the story, it's like it became a curse, but she was like, no, this isn't a curse to me, this is something I enjoy. And that spoilers, but we're in the spoilerverse, everybody loves red pandas, like they're super cute and never been fluffy, and as long as they're not Godzilla sized, they tend to not freak everybody out immediately.
Anything else you want to mention before we wrap up?
It was really cool when they're fundraising for the concert that all the money was Canadian money. I really enjoyed that.
So coming around to final thoughts, I want to use a quote that Domi Shi, the director, had to say about the movie. Everyone has been there. Everyone has been 13 and feeling like they're turning into some wild, hairy, hormonal beast. And I think that's why Pixar was drawn to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good concept. And even if the execution doesn't... I think that just generally this movie had great attention to details. A few maybe lacking in the idea of what they were trying to get across, but it still worked as a kid's movie. Like, story was pretty predictable. Nothing super dramatic happened, but at the same time, it was just solid. And I think all the people who are making a big fuss about the criticism need to take a chill pill and maybe not let their kids watch movies without doing research about them.
Yeah, for me, I enjoyed the movie. I think the fact that the director is a person in her mid-30s, she's the first woman to helm a Pixar movie by herself. The fact that she's from Canada, from Toronto, and that she chose to represent that part of the world, it meant a lot to me personally. I felt like I could connect with the movie in a special way. I know other people who've seen the movie didn't feel that connection because they just don't have those same memories that I do. But I still enjoyed the movie. And if you expect Pixar movies just to be some movie that's going to teach your kid a lesson, then this one doesn't quite do that as directly. It's more realistic, it's more artistic, and what Beeper said, it's like, do some research before you show a movie to your kids. With that all being said, I think I'm going to give Turning Red I'll give it a 3.2 out of 4 Bat Cookies.
I think, it wasn't amazing, but it wasn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. It was a very, solid kids movie with good things in it. And I did enjoy parts of it, being Canadian. So give it a 3.4 out of 4 Bat Cookies, maybe a 3.3. It's in that range. It's definitely deserves, I think, more than a 3, but it's not a 4.
So Turning Red, and apparently, Beeper, you get a kick out of this. The French translation turns out to Red Alert.
Oh, okay.
But it's streaming on Disney Plus. Apparently, it's the most streamed movie Disney Plus has ever had, so it seems to be doing well there. Makes me wish it could have been in theaters so that the whole world could have experienced the glory of Toonies and Loonies, but alas, that's not what we've gotten. So check it out on Disney Plus if you want.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
It's time to go inside the Bat Jar and pull out a topic for next week. All right. All right, this one's a big question. Why is everything set in the 1980s? Plus, why the 80s nostalgia?
Offhand, it's because boomers love the 80s.
So come back to the Batchar podcast next week when we talk about 80s nostalgia. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
And always remember to go to your happy place with your favorite people in the world.